My name is Margaret Carter, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 68 years old, and I thought I had lived long enough to see every shade of family love and disappointment. I was wrong. I want you to picture this with me. I was standing inside Denver International Airport, suitcase by my side, passport in my purse, heart full of excitement. I had paid $33,000 for a family trip to Paris, a trip I believed would give us memories to carry for the rest of our lives. And then, in the middle of that bustling departure gate, my daughter-in-law looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and told me there wasn't a ticket for me. I remember my chest tightening, as if the air itself had betrayed me. In that moment, I felt both invisible and painfully exposed. What kind of family forgets the one person who made the dream possible? And yet, something inside me shifted that day. Because what I didn't know then was that this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. Looking back, I realize how easily hope can blind us. After my husband passed away, every invitation to spend time with family felt like a gift. So when my son Jason suggested a holiday trip together, I didn't hesitate. He painted a picture of laughter in cozy cafes, Christmas lights shimmering along the Seine, and my grandchildren, Lily and Caleb, discovering a new culture for the first time. My heart swelled at the thought. For a woman who had spent the last 5 years carrying grief, this trip felt like a promise of healing. And when Jason said it would cost about $33,000, I barely blinked. I thought, what better use of my savings than to create memories with the people I loved most? Lauren, my daughter-in-law, was quick to take charge. She told me she had experience booking international travel, and she brushed off my offers to help with the details. It felt good, almost comforting, to believe that someone else was handling the logistics. I handed over my credit card information without a second thought. I told myself this was my gift, my early Christmas present to everyone. Flights, hotels, tours, fine meals, even tickets to a special holiday show, everything was first class. I imagined us walking together along the Champs-Élysées, sharing croissants in the morning, and raising a glass at dinner as the Eiffel Tower sparkled in the background. I didn't question how a family living on modest salaries could ever afford this kind of trip without me. Love has a way of silencing the practical voice inside, and at the time, I wanted so badly to believe this was about togetherness, not money. But sometimes, when something feels too perfect, it's because the cracks are already there, waiting to show themselves. As the weeks went by, I started noticing small details that didn't sit right with me. At first, I brushed them off. That's what we do when we want to believe the best in people. The first red flag came when I asked about the hotel. I thought it would be fun to look it up online, maybe daydream a little about where we'd stay. But every time I brought it up, Lauren would wave me off. She told me to just relax, to think of it as part of the surprise, and I let myself believe her. The second came 2 weeks before our flight. She asked me to send her a photo of my passport for the reservations. I sent it right away, feeling proud that I was keeping up with technology. A few days later, she casually mentioned that the hotel had been overbooked and she'd switched us to a different one. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, but I ignored the feeling. The third red flag was the hardest to forget. I was at the mall, arms full of shopping bags, when I saw Lauren sitting with her sister. I heard enough to understand that what I feared was true. My generosity wasn't being cherished, it was being exploited. And worse, it wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. I carried that heavy knowledge with me. But still, I pushed it down. Because the alternative, the idea that my own family could betray me, was too painful to accept. And yet, that pain was waiting for me at the airport. The morning of our flight finally arrived. I remember the hum of Denver International Airport, the rolling suitcases, the chatter of excited families. I stood there at the departure gate, ticket in hand, or at least I thought I had one. That was the moment everything unraveled. Jason couldn't even look me in the eye. Lauren spoke with a sweetness that felt more like poison. She told me there had been a mistake, that somehow my reservation wasn't there. She made it sound like an unfortunate oversight, something out of anyone's control, but I could see it for what it was. The reservation had never been made for me at all. For a split second, my old self nearly surfaced. I could feel the urge rising inside me, the urge to beg, to rush to the counter, to pay for another ticket on the spot just so I wouldn't be left behind. That was the role I had played for years, the fixer, the financier, the one who smoothed over everyone else's chaos. But something in me shifted that day. Standing there at that gate, I felt a quiet clarity. Instead of pleading, I simply let the moment pass. I stepped back. I breathed, and I told myself I was done proving my worth with money. So I smiled, wished them the trip of their dreams, and walked away. Not in defeat, but in a calm I hadn't felt in years. The taxi ride home gave me 47 minutes to reflect. By the time I stepped into my house, I knew this wasn't just a betrayal. It was also an invitation to finally respond instead of react. And I already knew exactly how I was going to respond. As the taxi pulled away from the airport, I stared out at the gray December sky over Denver. The old me would have been sobbing, already rehearsing apologies for somehow being in the wrong. But not that morning. I thought about the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is messy, driven by raw emotion, something you regret later. A response, though that's deliberate, it's controlled. And in that cab, I promised myself I would not waste another tear. I would respond. By the time the driver turned into my neighborhood 47 minutes later, the seed of a plan was already growing. I had the receipts. I had every booking confirmation. And most importantly, everything had been purchased in my name. That meant the power wasn't gone. It was sitting right in my hands. I walked into my quiet house, set down my suitcase, and opened my laptop. It was time to take back control. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my laptop. Years of managing bills and balancing checkbooks had taught me one thing: records never lie. Every hotel confirmation, every flight booking, every tour receipt, there they were, neatly stored in my email, and every single one was in my name, paid for with my card. That realization hit me like a spark. They thought they had outsmarted me, but they had left the door wide open. All I had to do was step through it. The hotel was my first call. A beautiful 5-night stay in Paris, 2 adjoining suites, nearly $3,800. I explained that I needed to cancel due to a family emergency. The woman on the other end of the line was polite, almost cheerful, as she told me that because I had purchased a flexible rate, there would be no penalty. A full refund would return to my card within a few days. I thanked her and hung up, my heart pounding not with sadness, but with relief. Next were the flights. 5 business class seats, $3,900 each. There would be cancellation fees? Yes. But after deductions, I would still recover around $14,000. That was money back in my pocket, not funding their betrayal. One by one, I canceled the tours, the river cruise, the private guide, the day trip to Versailles, even their tickets to a holiday show. Each confirmation email that landed in my inbox felt like a tiny victory. a quiet declaration that I was no longer the fool they believed me to be. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair. The silence of the house felt different now. Not empty, empowering. I had dismantled their dream vacation with nothing more than a series of phone calls and a calm resolve. And then, I wrote a letter. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I wanted them to understand that if they didn't want me included, they couldn't have my money either. Actions have consequences, and it was time they learned that lesson. When I finished canceling everything, I printed the letter I had written. It wasn't dramatic or cruel. It was calm, measured, the kind of message that would linger in their minds longer than anger ever could. I slipped it into an envelope and thought back to earlier that morning, before boarding. While they were distracted, I had quietly tucked it inside Lauren's makeup bag. By the time she found it, the damage would already be done. I could almost picture the sequence unfolding like clockwork. They'd reach the hotel first, confused when the reservation didn't exist. They would argue with the staff, shuffle through papers, call numbers that no longer worked. And later that evening, when Lauren finally unzipped her bag and discovered my note, the truth would sink in. Their perfect vacation hadn't been stolen by fate or error. It had been unraveled by the very person they had tried to erase. I poured myself another glass of wine that night, sat in the quiet glow of my living room, and felt something I hadn't in years: peace. The first message came at 2:47 in the morning, Paris time. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, but I turned it face down. I already knew what it would say. By the time I finally checked, there was a string of texts, each one more desperate than the last. At first, Jason's tone was confused. He wanted to believe there had been some kind of mix-up. Then panic set in pleas for me to help, to call the hotel, to fix things. Hours later, the tone shifted again, sharp and angry, blaming me for ruining their trip. I watched the messages pile up, but instead of crying, I made myself breakfast. I cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them, poured batter into a pan for pancakes. The smell of maple syrup filled the kitchen while my phone vibrated across the counter. Every buzz was another reminder that, for once, I wasn't rushing in to clean up their mess. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. They had left me stranded at the airport, yet now they were stranded in a foreign country with no hotel, no tours, and no safety net. I knew the cost of last-minute flights during the holidays around $4,000 per person. They'd either have to find that money or face the consequences of their choices. But beneath the satisfaction, there was a tug in my chest. Because mixed in with the angry messages were words from my granddaughter, Lily. Her voice was softer, almost apologetic, confused about what was happening. That reminder, innocent children caught in the middle, kept me grounded. I had taken back my power. Yes, but the hardest choices were still ahead. Would you like me to continue with Section 9, Twist Number 2? The call from Paris Police, 16:00–18:30. A few days later, the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something inside told me to answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself as an officer with the Paris Police. For a moment, my blood ran cold. I pictured accidents, hospitals, the worst-case scenarios. But the reality was different. Jason, Lauren, and the kids were being held because of an unpaid hotel bill around €2,000, just over $2,400. They had checked in, racked up charges, and then tried to leave without paying. The hotel had called the authorities. I felt my stomach twist. The children, Lily and Caleb, were not in trouble. The officer assured me. but they couldn't leave until the bill was resolved. I could hear the weight in his voice, a hint that if I wanted them released quickly, I had the means to make that happen. I sat there in silence for a long moment. On one hand, I had finally broken free of years of being treated like an endless wallet. On the other, 2 innocent children were now sitting in a police station in a foreign country, scared and confused, caught in the fallout of choices they never made. That's when I made a decision. I would pay, but only for the basics. The room and whatever meals were already included. Nothing more, no extras, no indulgences, no way for Jason or Lauren to spin it as a rescue. I was helping the kids, not bailing out their parents. When the call ended, I set the phone down and exhaled. Relief and anger mixed together like oil and water. Relief that Lily and Caleb would be safe. Anger that once again my kindness had been cornered. Because in that moment, I realized something important. If Lauren ever learned that putting the children in danger was enough to make me cave, she would use that knowledge again. And the thought of it made me burn inside. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the realization that Lauren had found a weakness she might exploit again. Using my grandchildren as bargaining chips was something I couldn't allow. So I called my attorney, sitting in his office. I laid everything out: the trip, the lies, the financial history I had carried for years. He listened quietly, then leaned back and said words that cut deep, but also gave me clarity. What I had experienced wasn't just family drama. It was financial abuse. I knew then that my response had to be more than emotional. It had to be permanent. Together, we drafted a new plan. First, I created education trusts for Lily and Caleb, enough for college, graduate school, whatever path they chose. Funds that were legally protected so their parents could never touch them. That decision gave me comfort. My love for my grandchildren would live on in a way that no manipulation could undo. Next, I rewrote my will. Jason and Lauren were removed entirely. My home, my investments, my savings, everything beyond the education funds would go to charities I believed in, organizations that would value what I had to give, instead of treating it like an endless ATM. And finally, I drew a clear boundary in the present. No more mortgage payments, no more car loans, no more emergency transfers. They were adults. They had jobs. It was time for them to carry their own weight. As I signed those documents, my hands didn't shake. For the first time in years, I felt steady, certain, free. This wasn't revenge. It was respect for myself, for my future, and for the grandchildren who deserved better examples than the one their parents had set. When Jason and Lauren returned, I knew the time for silence was over. I invited them to my house, not for dinner, not for reconciliation, but for clarity. They sat stiffly in my living room. Jason's eyes kept darting to his phone, as though he wished himself anywhere else. Lauren's posture was sharp, her arms folded tightly across her chest. For years, I had let moments like this intimidate me into giving in. Not anymore. I explained calmly what I had done. I told them about the education trusts for Lily and Caleb, about the charities that would inherit the rest of my estate, and about the immediate end to all financial support. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply told them the truth. Inside, I felt a strange mix of sadness and strength. Sadness because I had loved them with all I had, and strength because I was finally refusing to be used. Lauren tried to push back, insisting I was being unfair, but her words washed over me like background noise. Jason looked defeated, as though some part of him finally understood. When they left, I closed the door gently behind them. I leaned against it for a moment, breathing deeply, and realized something: this was not the end of my family. It was the beginning of a healthier one. Months have passed since that day, and my life feels lighter. Jason and I now have a distant but polite relationship. We speak, but only within clear boundaries. Lauren doesn't reach out, and I don't miss the tension she carried into every room. The best part: Lily and Caleb still find their way to me. Lily calls me about her college plans, and Caleb tells me about his soccer games and sketches he's proud of. They know now that my love is steady, not tied to the money their parents once demanded. I spend my mornings in peace, sometimes with a book, sometimes tending to the garden. I've reconnected with old friends, hosted dinners that are full of laughter instead of stress, and even started saying yes to things just for me. It's strange, but at 68, I feel freer than I ever did in my 40s. What I've learned is simple love should never be bought. Real love is shown in respect, in kindness, in presence. Money can make life easier, but it cannot create family where there is none. So if you've ever found yourself giving more than you receive, if you've ever wondered whether your worth is tied to what you can provide, I hope my story reminds you that it's not. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments, because your voice matters too. And if you found something meaningful here, don't forget to like and share. Someone you know might need this reminder today.